Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians over the last 48 years. My guest today is the brilliant comedian Mark Olver. Yeah! Hello, mate.
Hello. Such enthusiasm for a Sunday morning. I love it.
How are you doing? You all right?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm a little bit confused. So we're recording this when the clocks go back. So I never know. I never know how I should feel at this time. So what is it? It's 11 a.m., but it's really 12 a.m. Or is it 12 a.m., but it's really 11 a.m.? I don't know. I always get confused where my head is meant to be on these days. Well, I'm here. I'm talking to you. Nothing could be better.
I'm delighted you're here, my friend. We're gonna talk about your comedy career. The interview is gonna last about 45 minutes to an hour.
I'll tell you what. Can I get an extra 5 minutes on top of that?
You can talk for as long as you like, my friend.
Does anyone ever ask you about your life?
Well, you can do. We can do at the end. There's no problem at all.
I want to do it now.
Let's do it now, then. Go ahead.
What do you do for a living, or what did you used to do? Do you still work?
Yeah, my job. I worked in the civil service for 17 years, and then I worked in a school for 11 on the reception, and I used to entertain the teachers, going in with all the jokes I'd heard from all the comedians the night
Amazing.
before.
Amazing.
And since May this year, I've got a brand new job at Wandsworth Council. I'm based at Southfield, and I absolutely love it. I'm absolutely flying. I did 11 years at the school, and now I'm in this new job.
And where are you from?
My home city is Carlisle, but I've been in London for half my life.
Carlisle. Now, Carlisle is one of those places. There aren't many places in the UK that I've not been to, and I've been up there and I've been past it. I genuinely don't think I've ever done a gig in Carlisle. You know, it's one of the few places in the country that I don't think I've properly been to.
Well, we've got to put that right in 2023. There's two main venues. One is the Sand Centre in the centre of town, which is about 2,000 or 3,000 seater theatre. And there's the old fire station where a lot of them go. A lot of the comedians go there. I've seen the Noise Next Door and Mark Watson and Ian Sterling there, and they all seem to do that on the tours. So,
do you know what? I'm involved in the BBC New Comedy Awards, which maybe we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And hopefully doing that again next year. And we do the regional heats in places where telly doesn't normally go. And maybe I can try and convince them to go to Carlisle.
That would be amazing, and I will do my best to be there.
Well, there you go. Well, that's on me. I'll make that. I'll ask the questions today.
Please do. Is there
people with more power?
Is there anything else you'd like to ask me?
No, I'm very nosy, so I want to know what's on your shelves. But apart from that,
my shelf behind me is all my comedy books. So I read a load of comedy biographies, and I've got everybody here. The photographs on the top, that's a play I wrote called The Applicant, which we'll talk about later. I've got a caricature from Cheers Bar in Boston, which is my favorite American sitcom. And on the right-hand side is a picture of the Eric Morecambe statue in Morecambe, because Morecambe and Wise are the reason why this blog exists.
Wonderful, wonderful. I have done my interview. I am happy with all of the answers. Well, now let's talk about the more important person, me.
Well, as I say, thank you so much. And we're going to go right back to the start of your career. And if you can tell me, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
You know what? I think one of the reasons I was interested in asking about you is because I definitely see in you a comedy fan, obviously, and into comedy because I was a comedy fan. I got into comedy because I loved stand up from a very young age, and
Yeah,
like right from before realizing that stand up was a thing, loving Bob Hope films on the telly and um, Lauren Hardy, and all those. I used to find lots of black and white films on BBC Two on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon. And then when I discovered that stand up was a thing, and I remember getting a free tape with like a magazine. It was like GQ or
yeah,
one of those magazines, and listening to it and discovering Kevin Day and Mark Thomas, but also people like Bill Hicks.
yeah.
Um, Knowing that I loved Steve Martin's films, discovering he did stand up. So I loved stand up from a really young age. And then when I graduated from university, I wanted to know more about stand up and more about that world. And so decided that the best way to find out more about it was to do it. So in 1998, so what's that, 24 years ago, I went to a gig and yeah, and actually 24 years ago, pretty much this week, I would say, end of October, beginning of November,
Wow.
2022, I went to a gig and watched it, and then 2 weeks later did it.
Can you remember who was on the bill?
Do you know what? I don't actually. I tell you why. Because the story, the most important part of the story, apart from me gigging, is it's when I met Russell Howard. So me and Russ both turned up. Russell was 18. I was 22, 23.
Yeah.
And we both turned up at the same night to watch this fortnightly gig. And then I put my name down for the next fortnight, and Russ put his name down for the fortnight after.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I don't really remember much about the gig. I just remember uh, meeting Russell and knowing when I first met him that I'd have a friend for life, and then when I did my gig, and then the fortnight after watching him and instantly going, "Oh well, you're going to be famous and you're going to be brilliant." So and I knew that straight away.
Where was the gig?
It was a gig in a place called Virgin Murph. It was a fortnightly gig in Bristol on Park Street. The pub was called Le Chateau. I don't know what it's called. The Three Rams, maybe now. It might even be shut now, actually. And it was downstairs, and it was run by a guy called Marek Trebedi, and there was a guy probably on called Rob Coolwood, who is still going around. There was a guy called Andy McKelwey. Yeah. So
Wow.
I remember, I remember, I remember lots of it, but I was so obsessed with kind of getting my
Just
first stuff down
getting
that I
started.
don't
Yeah, yeah.
really remember anyone else. Yeah.
And what a friend to have, Russell Howard. I mean, he is he. I first saw him at the Edinburgh Fringe play a little tiny hut, and you could see there he was just so enthusiastic for the craft. So he must have been really good to know him then and work the way through the comedy together.
Yeah, it was really interesting actually because he was 18, he went to university and he knew he loved stand up.
Yeah,
And he loved Lee Evans and he loved Eddie Izzard.
yeah,
I was more of a comedy geek at that point than Russell. So I knew about Richard Pryor and Bill Hicks and but even people like Mort Sahl and Dick Gregory, and like I was a proper obsessive for like 50s and 60s American stand up.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and Russell didn't really know much about those sorts of people. Um, I remember having a conversation. Bearing in mind that this is late 90s, so people didn't Google everything all of the time. Um, and I remember having a conversation with him about Richard Pryor and him not really knowing who Richard
Yeah.
Pryor was. But he was an 18-year-old boy, so why would he know who Richard Pryor was?
I was very lucky enough to see Bill Hicks in Manchester on tour, and he was incredible. He walked on at midnight, and everybody was tired, and because it was a late start show. But I've never seen such. Everybody was so hooked as to what he was saying, and he was absolutely hysterical. And
Have you ever met Nick Doody?
Not on here, no. I've seen him live, but I've never met him. No.
So Nick supported Bill Hicks a couple of times
Oh, wow.
back in the day. So
Wow.
yeah, he'd be a good person to talk to
Yeah,
about Bill
yeah,
Hicks.
yeah. I'll certainly try and get him on the podcast. I'm also a massive Steve Martin fan. I'm like you. I think the first 10 films he did, the Carl Reiner ones, are just fantastic. And I got to see him with his bluegrass band
Oh, did you?
at the Hammersmith Apollo, and half of it was music and half of it was the zaniness, which is
Yeah.
what the crowd wanted.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to describe what you can see when I move my camera,
Oh,
I don't know
wow!
if you can.
You've got that's a photo of Steve Martin in his infamous costume on stage.
So that's the Wild and Crazy Guy
Yeah.
cover, and then just below that is Bob Newhart's
Oh,
album,
brilliant.
and then just above that is an album, Mort Saul,
Yeah,
Michael
he's
Dixon's
superb.
American comic. The Future Lies Ahead, and he's just standing outside at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. That
Good,
was
good, man.
a very famous comedy club. So there you go. So I think I fit the Brit. So my comedy geek credentials are literally above me, and actually above me here. I
Yeah.
don't know if you can see that. That's a poster from 1899 variety show,
Wow.
comedy variety show. So
That's
yes,
incredible. That's amazing. My first ever gig was I was born in 1967. I'm 55, and my first gig was Les Dawson in 1974 on a family holiday in Scarborough, and he was just incredible. I remember laughing at him, but not really getting it because I was only 7. But a year later, I saw Tommy Cooper, and I got the bug, and that was it. I just started writing everything down, all the gigs I ever went to, and that's how the blog developed. So, just
did you never think about? You never wanted to do stand up?
I've told comedians this story over and over again. I have had one go at doing stand-up comedy. Um, I knew a promoter years ago, and it was for a gong show for old folk. It couldn't be any worse set up. And he said, I said, I want to get it out of my system because I see a lot of comedians. I can remember the jokes and everything. I want to try and get it out of my system and see if I can do this. And he said, yeah. He said, no problem. He said, we can get you on for 3 minutes. And I walked out. There was 3 old blokes in the crowd. That was it. I walked out and I went, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself. And when I was at college, I was his double. And I thought, this is a failsafe. It's going to get laughs. And this old bloke just looked at me and went, fuck off. And I gunged off. and the promoter went, have another go. So I did it again. Same thing happened. And I thought, well, never say never again. But I think my thing is going to be in the crowd, supporting you all. And that's what
Lovely.
happened. So, but yeah, I have actually had a go.
Good.
And never say never again, as I said. So please describe your first ever gig. Can you remember your first ever gig?
I can actually. I can remember it. I don't really remember the material that I did, but I do remember what happened because it was kind of, for some people, slightly legendary in a very small L for legendary. was the second time I'd met Russell. It was a fortnight after, and we went back to this gig. We met up first. We had a little chat, and I remembered my 5 minutes perfectly. And because I like people like Bill Hicks, I like the kind of. I thought I wanted to be an edgy comedian. I thought I wanted to be all kind of dangerous, and I really like Sam Kinison and some of those guys
I
as well.
superb.
So
Yeah.
I thought I'd be really edgy, and then and so I went on, and some women in the audience took offence to what I was talking about, and stood up and went, "We find this incredibly offensive." And then one of her friends stood up and started shouting at me, and then Russell shouted from the back, "It's comedy, it's meant to be offensive." And then they started shouting at him, and some guys I knew, and there's a guy called James Parker who is sort of the Bristol version of Richard Gill. He goes to loads of gigs, um, and again, this was a while ago. Since then, he works in computer games, but he's also been, one of the judges on the Perrier,
Oh,
where
yeah.
you can just be a punter and get selected to be a judge. So he's done that. So he really knows his comedy, and this was when he was first starting getting into comedy. And he was there with his friends and his girlfriend, and women were shouting at me, and Russell was shouting at them, and then they were shouting at Russell. This little group started shouting at them as well, and one of their girlfriends started crying because it was all very aggressive and uncomfortable. My first ever gig.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing story.
And I came off thinking, God, I love this. I love this.
There's something about it, isn't it? It's just magical. And it's so good. It's so nice to know I've got a rival as well in Bristol.
You have. Yeah, I know. One day, I think I'll
I'd like
keep
to
you
meet
to a
him.
pub. He's a very, very nice man. He's a very nice man, and yet loves his comedy. Loves his comedy.
Yeah. Well, what's not to love? What do you like to talk about on stage? Do you have any specific themes or any recurring themes or anything like that you talk about?
I don't know really. I think I'm a little bit different than the most of, not all, but most of the people you will have met, because I do so much comparing and I do so much warm up. And one of the reasons I do that is because I know what's inside my brain. I know what my thoughts are. I've always enjoyed much more talking to other people and finding out about them.
So you prefer comparing and warm up to solo routines?
I think so. I mean, I do them, and I headline for gigs, and I've done Edinburgh shows. I never enjoy it as much, and when I'm doing it, I always try and play. I always mess about a little bit. Partly that might be something to do with the confidence in my material, but actually over the years, I just enjoy it. I just enjoy, and I'm aware I've got some good stuff, and I like writing stuff, and I've got a fairly good comedy brain. But I know what I enjoy, and I also know what I'm good at, and what I'm good at is playing, is sort of messing about, is talking, and that's the stuff I'm much more interested in. And over the years, I definitely was filthier. I definitely did a lot of blue. I'm really good at filthy stuff.
What is particularly impressive watching you, which I've done many times. I've watched you do routines and I've watched you compare. Is your joy of doing it. When you walk out, you know you're going to have a good time because you're so enthusiastic and joyous for it. And certainly when we went to the last leg TV recordings, which you compare, you had that audience every time in the palm of your hand. It's wonderful to see, and we're in such a good mood when the recording actually starts, which is how it should be.
I do love it. There is definitely a joy. There's also something a little bit um, less joyous about it, which is I take joy in. I'm quite a pragmatist. I like making things happen. It's one of the reasons I like being a compere, because I like being able to get the audience in the right place. I like
Yeah.
being able to and so there's definitely a joy. There's definitely an art. There's definitely the creative. It gets my juices flowing massively. But there is also just a really practical, pragmatic. I love being able to get the job done. I take great satisfaction in just being. I'm very much a central midfielder where I get the ball and then I pass it to people who can do better things with the ball. But you still need that person to get the ball, and I love that side of it.
Well, I've seen you many times on actually on the last leg because you play different characters to help out the sketches and
I
everything.
do.
Plus, as well, I always go along to the last leg with my dear friends Ken and Jill, who I met on the front row at Always Be Comedy, and they said to me, "I'll come along to the last leg." And to have nicknames for everybody in the audience as well, they're known as Mr. and Mrs. Ken, which is
Ken and
genius.
Ken and Mrs. Ken.
Yeah, and that is wonderful that every time they go, they're going to be recognised and all the rest. It's a wonderful a build up to the show, and there was another example with you where we went to it was up the creek very recently, and you were comparing there, and there was some people in the crowd who were, should we say, inebriated, and you very calmly had them in your sights, but you weren't gonna explode or get rid of them or anything like that. I think they were eventually removed, but the way that you did it was wonderful because again, you have to make it comic.
Yeah, and again, it is that thing. I do really like practicality of it. I do
Yeah,
really like going. Well, I want to make sure that because like I said, I'm a comedy fan, like you. I'm a comedy fan,
yeah,
and I really like the idea of being able to make that show as good as that show can be, um, and that's why I do those things. And over the years, I've learned different skills and different tricks, and also still learning and still working out kind of how to do these things. But at heart, I like getting the job done.
yeah. Good man. So, what do you think makes a good comedian?
Um, there's basically three things, and it's everything that is written in comedy, comedy courses, comedy books, blah blah blah. Everything just boils down to three things: work hard, be funny, don't be a dick. And it
I
really
totally
is,
agree.
it is totally, it's totally that. And you can sometimes get away with two of those three things, but the two you have to be if you're not funny, to work really hard and you have to be an incredibly nice person. If you're a dick, you have to work really hard, but you have to be so naturally funny to get away with being a dick. And you don't always get away with being a dick. And if you and if you don't work hard, you can be incredibly lovely and sort of get away with it. But every comedian that you will have spoken to, every comedian that you will have seen has, and whether they are super famous, your Al Murrays or your Joe Lysitts, or whether they are people who just work really hard and people know them, but maybe they're not famous, like this guy here. Every single comedian, and then also all those comedians who who are just brilliant circuit comedians. When you've been going for a while, all you have to do is work incredibly hard at it and gig everywhere and do everything and just be nice to people. And if you do those things, because if you're nice to people, you then get invited back to do other gigs. And if you're a dick, then people won't want to gig with you. And if you're not funny, by working hard, you can learn how to be funny. But also by being nice, you can make friends with people and chat with them.
Yeah.
And being nice is about listening as well as talking. Um, and so yeah, listening is really important. I think listening is key. I would ask anyone listening to this podcast now to tell me how many years you worked in the school and what job you did in the school and the name of that venue and how many seats it is in Carlisle. Because if you don't listen,
What's the
you don't
point?
learn stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the magical things about this blog is supporting not only popular comedians but also brand new comics and various different degrees of their career. And it's wonderful watching comedians grow and develop. And I think listening, like you say, is half of the key. I totally agree. I think you've got to be funny. That's the main thing. But I also look for originality, and I look for if they're very endearing or very nice, as you say, because you want to be comfortable in their company and go for a beer or whatever afterwards with them, and if they're very direct or very frank, that's also good as well, because they can talk about whatever they want as soon as they go up to the microphone. As long as the crowd are on their side, then they're away. And you're very good at that. This is what's going to happen, and then you will go into a wonderful routine or audience banter, and you're very, very warm on stage. I've noticed that as well.
Absolutely. Also, 11 years in a school and the fire station in Carlisle. Just so I say it.
Well done, mate. Well done.
The noise next door played the fire station. Anyway,
thanks for listening.
what you were saying there. So years ago, when I first started comparing, I did a gig in Bristol called the Comedy Box. Still there, run by a bloke called Steve Lown. Excellent gig in Bristol. And I gigged with an Australian who actually I gave her first ever gig in the UK, a woman called Kitty Flanagan, who is an amazing comic, was fairly famous in Australia, doing some sketch stuff, and then came over to the UK, did some stand-up, got to a certain level over here, did really well, and then moved back to Australia again and continued sort of being successful in a telly mainstay in Australia. She got some amazing stuff and was a brilliant, brilliant comic. And I gave her first gig because Adam Hills was doing a gig for me. It might have even been one of his first previews of Go You Big Red Fire Engine back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I needed an act for a couple of weeks' time. And he went, "Oh, my friend Kitty is currently in France, but coming to the UK soon. I think she can do it." So I messaged her and she came and did the gig. Anyway, a couple of months after that, we were doing a gig together. I was comparing. I didn't go down very well. She drove me home. I didn't have a car at the time and was living with my mum and dad. Anyway, she drove me home. And as we were getting out, I was like, "Oh God, I'm really sorry." I said, I didn't feel like I was very good today. I said, the audience liked me, but they didn't think I was funny at all. And she went, it's fine. She went, that's absolutely fine. She said, you'll get the funny, you'll work out the funny. She said, but some comedians try so hard all of their life and never get the audience to like them. She said, and if you can make those people like you, she said, then the funny stuff will come. And I think
I
she's
totally
absolutely spot
agree.
on.
Yeah,
You
very
still
much.
need to work hard at it. You still need
Yeah.
to work hard at the funny. And I think the people who don't think they can rely on just being nice and being likable, they have to build, they have to work on the other stuff. But if
Mm.
you do work on it, if you do build it, then you will, then you at least you've got that foundation of funny at the beginning.
Very much so. I totally agree with that. When you walk onto the stage, are you nervous? Do you get nervous beforehand? How and if so, how do you cope with nerves?
No, I don't. I don't actually. The only time I get nervous is if I'm doing something brand new. If I'm doing a new type of show, or maybe something I haven't done for a while. So um, sometimes I might get to do warm up in front of an arena, 10,000, 20,000 people. And if I've not done that for a while, then I will get nervous. Um, I weirdly I get nervous. So I've got a gig in Bristol on a Monday night that I've just set up. It's called Pushing It, and it's deliberately for newer comedians to do longer than they should, to get them used to the idea of being on stage for slightly too long. And I've deliberately set it up where it's not an easy gig. It's upstairs in a room. There's only 20 people maximum. Um, I don't worry about the lighting too much. I don't worry about any of that stuff too much. Um, and if I've got a newer, and so I try and have a new idea every week. And bearing in mind that I prepare and headline and do the warm up for some of these major events, um, nothing petrifies me more than doing a brand new piece of material that I've thought about in my car on the way to the gig. When you can look in 18 people's eyes and I'm not able to use the tricks that I can do with the sing-alongs and the nonsense and the nicknames and it's just like this is the material. That's the petrifying bit.
That is fascinating. I can give you an example for me. Other than this blog, the most creative thing I've ever done is the poster behind me on top of
For the
my
play,
shelf, which was the play.
the applicant.
The applicant. Yeah, I wrote the play, and
Just
myself.
showing off that I was just showing off that I was listening again. By the way,
Well done, thank you. My friend and myself appeared in it. It's basically about me coming down from Carlisle to London. I've got a very successful girlfriend in London, but I've never had a job, so I've never had a job interview. And each section of the play is me getting better at job interviews. And my mate who played all the interviewers is very good at accents and everything. So I ran out and it was monologue, interview, because I'm sitting in the waiting room and I'm looking around and there's the audience and I start chatting to them. So I wrote about 5 or 6 pages of monologue. And the first night I did this, I ran out and I forgot the words. I was like a rabbit in headlights. And I was petrified. I was thinking, what am I going to do? We've had 10 weeks of rehearsing this. And as soon as my mate came on, it was perfect. But I've never been. I'm hoping to resurrect it because I originally wrote it for the Edinburgh Fringe, but I've never really gone round the houses there to do it. But we put it on for Comic Relief, and I got nearly £2,000 for it. We did 3 shows.
Amazing.
It was amazing. And the funniest joke, if I can say, was his name, which was called him Norman Oliver Hope, because the rejection letters always said Dear N.O. Hope, which was quite
Nice. Oh, that's a nice joke.
So maybe one day, and you
One
mentioned
day.
before about Lee Evans or something like him, he would be amazing playing this little innocent with the interviews and everything. Anyway, let's move on. How do you remember all your routines? Do you, if you're doing a solo set, do you have them written down on your hand? Do you use notes or anything like that?
No, I write on stage and I don't really make notes of anything. Um, say to people, I was just thinking this when you were talking about the play about how rubbish sometimes I am at remembering stuff. I'm really good at remembering the words and the jokes within my sets. I'm sometimes rubbish at remembering that those bits actually exist. So if someone says to me, "Oh, do you remember that bit you used to do about that?" I'll be like, "Oh God, yeah, I've not done that for ages," and then I can do it pretty much verbatim, because stand up for me is very much about repetition, and it's about just keeping on doing it and building and baby steps. And when you have that repetition, um, it's easier to remember stuff
Yeah, yeah.
because that stuff goes in your brain and stays there.
Right. So would you say that, having asked those last two questions, would you say that as soon as you pick up a microphone on stage, as you walk onto stage, the nerves will go away and you're in total control of that audience? You're there to make them laugh.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the nerves are even there much more before I go on. I just like to
Yeah,
be me.
yeah, yeah.
I also wouldn't say I'm ever in total control of that audience. Um,
But you never know what's going to happen, I suppose.
yeah, but it's like, you can be the best plate spinner in the world, but be the best juggler in the world, and nothing is precise. That's the joy. The best thing about stand up is that it's not a precise science.
Yeah,
So no one is ever in perfect control of everything, and things change, and that's why we love it. It's an art form based on failure. Like, it should be about failure. It should stand up is something that should not work. It's an incredibly arrogant thing to do, to go, everyone thinks they're funny and everyone thinks they're the funniest one in their group, and we're going out on stage telling people to laugh at us. Like, that's just absolutely ridiculous. What a stupid thing. um and so it shouldn't really work. And
yeah,
so when it doesn't work, that's really nice, because that sort of reinforces how we feel, and we're like, oh yeah, no, it doesn't, and so it doesn't work, and therefore I should do this to make it better. And that's what stand up is. It's about getting better.
that's so good. I say to a lot of comedians who've been on this podcast, my guess is it's all about experience. You have to experience a bad gig to become a better comedian. Would you agree with that?
100, 100%,
Yeah,
100%. Like, you learn more from the bad ones, but also you learn more. If someone is still doing the same shtick in exactly the same way for 2 years, 3 years, maybe 4 years, if I'm being generous, it's because they've not worked hard. Like, if they're doing
yeah,
exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, it's because and basically, and that's not even a criticism of their work ethic. That's just a criticism of the fact that their stuff won't get better. Because if you change your stuff around, year or every 18 months, your new stuff is always better than your old stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And so every time you change it, it gets incrementally a little bit better. And so conversely, if you never change it, or you never change your attitude, you never learn new things, your stuff won't get incrementally better, and therefore it'll just stay the same. And
That's
what's
really
the point?
interesting. Yeah, yeah. You see, you're the sort of comedian. I can't ever imagine you having a bad gig, but you must have had bad gigs as well as good gigs over the years.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially doing sets and especially misjudging it and doing the wrong thing in terms of warm up. And the reason that I see so much and get so much warm up, but especially the warm up,
Yeah,
is like I am almost like I am almost a sure thing, and I say that in the sense that no comedy is a sure thing. But in terms of and that's just based on statistics, based on how much warm up that I do, and how often the audience have been in the right place for the producers and the director,
yeah, yeah.
um, and all that. Like I am almost, I'm a good 97% sure thing when I do the warm up. But I've had to get there, and I've had to get there by being 60% good and then 70% good, and that means that there's 30% that were absolute dog shit, and you know those things do happen, but they have to happen because that's how we learn.
You mentioned before about the BBC New Comedy Awards. Tell me, tell
Yes.
me, tell me more about those, and what's your view of comedy competitions in general? Do you think they're a good thing?
No, I really don't like them. I say that as someone who is a producer of one of them. uh,
Why not?
um, I just so okay. I don't think it's possible to compare every comedian with each other, because different comedians have different aims, different audiences want different things. You can have a room of 100 people, and you can have 10 acts on, and everyone will like act. And do you know what? Maybe 70 of them will love one act, and maybe one of them will really love another act. But the love that that one person has for that one act might be stronger than the love that the 70 people have for one of the other acts. And
Yeah, yeah,
and difficult to compare styles, and sometimes people are better over longer sets rather than 5 minutes. Some people's stuff doesn't have as immediate reaction, immediate impact, and then 2 weeks later you're still remembering that particular joke or that particular words. Some people develop in different ways, and some people are great when they start and they're not so great. Some people takes a while to get going. There's so many reasons that comedy competitions are pointless. And then I'm a consultant producer at the BBC New Comedy Awards. And basically what that means is Phil McIntyre, the company who make it, I know quite well and have done quite a lot of warm up for them over the years.
yeah.
And they wanted they got the rights to do the BBC New Comedy Awards, and they wanted someone who understood stand up to be involved in it. And because they knew me, I got involved. And what they wanted from me was to make it feel like stand up. So they didn't really want it to feel like a competition. They wanted it to feel like stand up. They wanted it to feel like a showcase. They wanted the new comedians to be able to perform in ways that they would perform while getting better, and have a sort of a mentor type person. And I love it, absolutely love it. And the competition element has to be there for us to get that on the telly.
You
The
think it
competition,
help? Do you think it helps a comedy career winning a competition?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Sometimes, not everyone. So no, but yes. And also it can help you if you don't win.
yeah.
So no and yes. And just being involved in it. So yes and no. We have people who didn't even get to like the showcase stage, but their clips were so good but not right that have ended up getting agents. We've had people get to the showcase stage but didn't get to the televised regional final bits who have ended up uh, supporting comedians on tour. Um, we've had people get to the regional final bit and not win, but a telly person has looked at them and gone, "Oh wow, I really like them." Um, there is no win or lose in this thing.
No,
Like
no.
there are people who if I particularly like their clip, and there's like 3 or 4 judges in every stage, and not everyone is always going to like everything, but if I like them, then I've gone to someone. Oh, I really like that person. You should
Yeah,
give
yeah,
you should give them
yeah,
a gig. And unfortunately, like the way the telly program is made, it's nice to have a winner. It's nice to have a winner on every regional final. It's nice to have a winner of the whole thing. And so that's the top of it. That's the peak. That's the
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
iceberg that we can see. But the whole process stretches below the telly, and I love that bit, and I love the opportunities and the support and the
Yeah.
stage time and the making new friends and the adventure. I love all of that.
Brilliant, brilliant. You're a fantastic compare. I've seen you compare in few comedy clubs, and you've been wonderful. Tell me more about how you got the warm up gigs in the TV recordings. How do you go about doing that? Was it a promoter advising you to do this, or did you
No,
physically go up? Or?
so what happened was, you might remember this. There was a TV show called Kings of Comedy. It
Right.
was it was basically comedians in like a Big Brother house. It was comedians meets Big Brother, and it was filmed in Bristol and good people in it. It was a combination of the experienced
Yeah,
and the new. So, and this was 2004. Andrew Maxwell was in it. Boothby Graffo was in it.
I love him.
Um,
Yeah,
Janie Godley.
brilliant.
There were some really, but also people like Stan Boardman and some of the others.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think I
and
remember that. Yeah,
yeah, and basically what they wanted to do was essentially build a comedy club in the TV studio,
yeah.
and so came to watch me do a gig. Um, sorry, I'm
Are we all right?
I'm there. I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Um, I'm turning myself on, as it were.
I
I might. Can you still hear me?
can still hear you.
Fantastic. Let's hope that this doesn't change any sound quality. Oh, I'm messing around, and I shouldn't mess around, should I, Rich?
All right.
So they were making this show called Kings of Comedy. They wanted to build a comedy club in a TV studio. There was a gig that I used to regularly compare, and so they came to watch me at the gig. They phoned me up and said, "Can we come and watch you?" And they watched me compare this gig, and I told them sort of how it would work. And then a couple of days later, they phoned me up and went, "Oh, actually, we need someone to do the warm up for the live show." It was hosted by Russell Brand. Would you come and do the warm up for the live show? They said it's a bit like comparing, and I went, "Yeah." And that was 2004, sort of
Wow.
October 2004. And yeah, that was the start of it.
So you must be one of the go-to warm up people for the TV recordings because I used to go to a lot of them. I used to go to Parkinson all the time. I used to go to Jonathan Ross. I used to go to loads of them. And but I only really got to see you do the last leg. And of course, that's one of the biggest shows on TV now. But I was just fascinated as to how you get each one. But it's like a Rolling Stone effect, is
A
it?
little bit. So I did Kings of Comedy, and that was for a production company. That was for Endemol.
Yeah.
And then and they're sort of the comedy side of it, Zeppatron. And then a couple of months later, Zeppatron made a thing called Fuck You, in the May
nice title.
of 20. Yeah. And that was hosted by May of 2005. And that was hosted by David Mitchell, Karen Taylor, Justin E. Collins, and people like Frankie Boyle on it.
Yeah.
Sort of some of their first telly, Frankie Boyle, Alan Carr, Paul Foot. Right. There was some Ruth Bratt. There were some amazing people on it. And then the same production company in the October 2005, Endemol, they made a show in the same studio in Bristol, because these were all in the studio. And I'm pointing because it's literally 300 yards away from my house. In that direction was where the studio was.
I must go to Bristol. I've never been.
Oh, you must. You'd love it. But that studio's not there anymore. It's flats.
Right.
But in the same studio, about 6 months after they made Fuck You, they made a new show that they wanted to warm up on, and they weren't sure about it because it's a bit of a weird thing, hosted by a guy who used to do a lot of telly, disappeared for a little bit, and no one was 100% good. It was a very confusing show to explain. And that was October 2005, and that was Deal or No Deal.
Wow.
And we were booked in for, I think, 6 weeks at the beginning.
Wow.
And I think it was something like, I'm going to say something like 50 episodes, something like that, 58. We ended up doing 3,500.
So you were the warm-up on Deal or No Deal?
I wasn't the warm-up for the very first couple of weeks.
Wow.
They got some other people.
Wow.
And then they weren't 100% happy with all of those other people. And then Muggins came in and stayed there.
Good man, that's what a gig, so to speak.
No, it was
that's amazing.
It was crazy because it became a phenomenon, and it was massively unexpected. And so during that time, that was very much like in my wankier moments, I see that as my Beatles in Hamburg experience.
That's a perfect answer.
Because we were doing three or four shows a day, 5 days a week.
Wow.
We were I was constantly on. I was, on and off. And Noel Edmonds is an unusual man, but in terms of TV presenting, in terms of that, one of the few actual geniuses that I've worked with. Right. He was phenomenal at his job and knew telly inside and out.
I have an amazing fact about Noel Edmonds for you.
Hit me.
His auntie or grandma, I can never remember, lived in Carlisle. And as I was growing up, he used to come in with his helicopter, fly in.
Did he?
Yeah. And we always used to look, there's Noel Edmonds. Yeah. I'm sure it was either his auntie or his grandma.
That's really funny.
And that's the only fact I know about him.
It's a good fact though. I like it. He and I just did that for a long time. And then while doing that, I started picking up other shows along the way. So very early on, I did the IT Crowd,
Oh, brilliant.
and realised that sort of I could do sitcoms. I did the last ever episodes of Vicar of Dibley when she gets married.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, yeah.
I then started picking up other game shows like Pointless.
Good man.
And
So I mean, it's a wealth of experience in TV warm up.
yeah, I mean, basically, what happens is every show has a production manager who is the money person, a couple of producers who sort of look after the content, floor managers who look after the floor,
Yeah,
obviously the talent who, your Jimmy Carrs, your Adam Hills, your Richard
yeah,
Osmonds, and each of those people end up going on to other shows, but also each of those people end up having friends who work on other shows. And
yes,
so what's happened over the years is that a production manager from Deal or No Deal will go and work on another show, or Noel Edmonds will want me to do the warm up for his shows. And if I do 2 or 3 different Noel Edmonds shows, there might be 2 or 3 different production managers who then might go on to 2 or 3 different shows. And then
yeah.
the producers might then become commissioners or and so it's all this kind of,
So
all this different thing.
is that how The Last Leg came about when I saw you compare that?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know. So that's made by a company called Open Mic, and I've done quite a bit for Open Mic. But also, so I didn't do the warm up for the Paralympics in 2012 because there wasn't a real audience.
Mm.
And then we did a pilot for The Last Leg. And it was literally a pilot. It was what they call a TX pilot. And a TX pilot is basically, so a non-TX pilot is you're trying to work out how a show works. So you do a couple of episodes of it, and those episodes will never see the light of day. That's a non-TX. And TX basically means transmission. So
Yeah.
a non-TX pilot is we're going to try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll never talk about that ever again. A TX pilot is maybe a show that is a one-off of something, and if that works, then they will make more of them.
Right.
And The Last Leg was sort of a TX pilot because it was basically they gave the boys to do the chance to do like a review of the year. It was, and so they did it in, I think it was like December 2012. And then very quickly they wanted, and so they asked me to do that. And then when they got the series, I ended up doing the series, and I've been there ever since.
Brilliant. Well, it's one of my favourite TV comedy shows, and it was a privilege to go and watch it being recorded because, as I say, you make the audience will them on, and they're so good at what they do when they come on. Let's move on. I am very privileged to be able to go to the Edinburgh Festival every year.
Yes,
and I've been going since 2005, and I go for a week. It's my holiday, and I see about 50 shows in the week. And I'm shattered when I come back, but I've had the most amazing experience. Loads of my friends and everything go. Tell me about your first experience of the Edinburgh Fringe, because I keep a lot of flyers and programs and everything, and you kept cropping up in solo shows year after year, and I'm thinking that's Mark Olver. He's still doing the shows. It's extraordinary, your work ethic on that as well.
Have you ever seen the Woody Allen film Zelig? And basically,
yes.
I'm sort of the Zelig of comedy. I think I'm always around and about and nearby.
It's great.
So me and Russ went up in 1999. Russell was in the semi-finals, and then the final of So You Think You're Funny. And then I'm going to say it was 2001. He was in the finals of the BBC New Comedy Awards, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Won that year by Alan Carr and Rob Deering, Justin Morehouse,
Oh,
Des
great.
Clark, Jared Christmas.
Yeah.
Were all in the final. 1999, his So You Think You're Funny semi and final, that was Josie Long and David O'Doherty, Jimmy Carr, Karen Taylor, Spencer Brown.
Brilliant.
There were some amazing people around at that time. And we went up in, I bought a car. I bought an old Y-Reg VW Polo. And me and Rush drove up to Edinburgh in my old Y-Reg VW Polo. It started making noises when we got there. We parked it, left it on a side street for a week. And then when it was time to drive home, it was still making the noises. Then there was a clomping noise and the noise stopped. So we thought the car had just fixed itself. And then the alternator had fallen off. And so the car just parked, just rolled into the hard shoulder. Probably near Carlisle, actually.
Wouldn't surprise me.
And then, and then the AA had to fix the car and get us home. And then I went up every year from there. I did my first show. Russell did the Big Value in 2003.
Yeah.
Then I did the Big Value in 2004. That was a package show. Then I did the Comedy Zone in 2005. Yeah. I was comparing Matt Green, Izzy Suttie, Russell Kane.
Brilliant.
And then I did my first show in 2006, Happy Accidentally. Then 2007, I did Say Something. And then 2008, I did a show where I walked from Bristol to Edinburgh. And then I've been going up with other bits and pieces since then. The thing about Edinburgh is, so this is how Adam Hills describes my stand-up and my warm-up stuff. He describes me as doing joyful involvement. That's what Hills describes me as. Joyful involvement, he says. And it wasn't until he said that when I was like, oh shit, no, that is what I do. I'm just like, yeah, all right, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll have that. Yeah, let's go there. Oh, that sounds fun. Brilliant. And there's nowhere in the world better for joyful involvement than Edinburgh.
I totally agree.
And I think in 2000, it might have been 2002, we were in the Pleasance Courtyard and we were chatting to Ross Noble around a table. And he was doing a show in one of the big rooms. And at the end, he would have a guy in a mask dancing on stage. And he asked us if we wanted to do it. And I said, absolutely. And so I just ended up on stage with Ross Noble just dancing in a mask.
How fantastic.
In 2003, I went up to Edinburgh for a week. I was on crutches because I dislocated my leg, which was actually the story that I used for my first show in 2006. And all the comedians would play football, and I would play football as well. But that year I wasn't playing football because I was on crutches. So I just sat down watching them play football, watching all my mates play football, and ended up chatting to a guy who was also not playing that day for some reason. And it turned out he was Jermaine from Flight of the Conchords, and they were in Edinburgh for their first ever Edinburgh show.
Wow.
And so I ended up going to watch their Edinburgh show, and they forgot their posters, or their posters hadn't been delivered. And so their first year wasn't very well attended. And it's always about, I'm ranting on a bit, but it's always, fine, for me, about putting yourself in those positions.
Yeah.
It's about chatting to the stranger at football that you don't know. It's about
saying yes to Ross Noble when he wants you to dance on stage. It's about, and it's not a career thing. It's not um, it's not a progression thing.
No.
It's just wanting to get involved. And I grew up as a working class kid, and the idea of being able to get involved in this shit, in anything, is absolutely baffling to me. For anyone, you're a little bit older than me, but for anyone who grew up in the late 70s and 80s, will totally understand what I mean when I say we didn't think stuff like this would happen. We didn't think stuff like this was, especially when you live outside of London, when you live in Carlisle or you live in Bristol.
Yeah, very true.
Like for working class people, you never think that these are things that you can have a go at. And like for me, meeting Jermaine was not about going, oh, you're going to be famous, or oh, you're going to be in superhero films, or you're going to be in Flight the Conchords. For me, it was genuinely like, I don't think I've ever had a proper conversation with a Kiwi before. like literally,
it's so
as basic as that.
It's so true, and I think that's why certainly I keep going back to Edinburgh year after year. Certainly, it's so true listening to that answer, because there I was aged about 10, 15, something like that. And I'd be watching Minder and Del Boy on the TV, and I'd be watching Michael Caine films. My favourite band have always been Madness. And there I was wanting to come down to London, and I never ever thought I'd do it. And I've spent half my life here. You know, my mum worked in an antique shop. My brother makes adverts. He runs an advertising agency now. And my dad's legacy was he was the president of NALGO, and with the three unions, he helped create Unison. So what a legacy that is, you know? And certainly at the school, they use Unison as the main union. So there I was, used to be sitting behind the reception, and these people would walk in and they'd recognize me for my dad. And who would have known that? You know, it was extraordinary.
It's just experiences. That's what life is. It's just I often think of comedy like Lego, basically. Just this idea, like we've got this massive Lego set that we can play.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly loving something like comedy, you're in the best city for it, because you can go to a different comedy club every night of the week. And when you mentioned before about Carlisle, it's fascinating because Carlisle has cottoned on to this and is developing more its comedy world, if you like. More people are going there, you know. So it's all fascinating listening to what you have to say. Let's move on again. With all the COVID years, all the horrible times that we had during COVID, did you do many online gigs? Did you like?
No, I didn't. I started an online panel show with a producer called Simon, called Who Said That, and I really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah.
I did a few charity things. I run a project called Belly Laughs, and we did one of those online, which I loved. I didn't really enjoy the live gigs online. I didn't hate them. I just didn't enjoy them. And I think one of the reasons I didn't enjoy them, like when we finish this conversation, I'm going to go and have my Sunday roast.
So am I.
Which is lovely. And I've had a nice morning chatting to you, and that's been smashing. And then I'll go and have my roast. If I was doing a gig during lockdown right now, and I was, trying to make people laugh and do all that, when I press that leave button, then that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, funny, bye.
Yeah.
And that was always my problem with them. They always felt a little bit empty.
yeah. With me, during the pandemic, I thankfully they were there, but when they first started, I used to go to Always Be Comedy. I used to go to Happy Mondays with Sean James, and I used to go to The Irishman Abroad with Jarlath Regan. And Boothby Graffoe later came on and did a brilliant hour just playing his guitar. But certainly with something like Always Be Comedy, there was never any audio when it first began. So I used to sit here and just laugh at four walls. And I thought I'd going to be taken away. It was like, what's going on here? Because they can't hear me. But then the comedians that were confident doing it online, they brought the audio in and they could chat to the audience, they could time the jokes and everything. But I'm 100% with you. Thank God live comedy is back, because
absolutely. I started doing outside gigs as soon as we could. Like I found spaces to go to and work them all out like immediately.
Yeah. There's something about having a few beers on a Saturday night with your mates and then going into a room and you're in the moment and you sit there and you go, right, make me laugh. And whoever's on the bill, it's just the most magical thing, seeing something live. Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Did you grow up with lots of comedy?
Yeah, I did loads and loads. Like I said, I loved Lenny Bruce, Bill Hicks, Mort Sahl, Dick Gregory, Woody Allen. Loved lots of the black and white people, I suppose. I loved Flanders and Swan. I loved
brilliant.
the Goon Show.
Yeah.
I loved a lot of that stuff. Steve Martin, Robbie Williams, like a lot of the people that I discovered when I was growing up. And then going into people like Bill Hicks, Kevin Day, Mark Thomas. And then when I started doing it, all of my favourites, Billy Connolly, obviously, and then all my favourites kind of became people that I know. So Daniel Kitson, who everyone talks about as their favourite comedian, and the reason is because he is amazing. Have you seen him?
I've seen him twice. Yeah, I saw him at the Stand in Edinburgh. He was incredible. And I love comedians who just take one word and run with it. And he is a perfect example of that. He was amazing. And you're totally in with what he's saying. You're totally involved with what he's talking about. And then suddenly it goes off on a tangent and everything. It's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. I love Tommy Tiernan.
Yeah.
I love, and then just people who are my friends who I think are just astounding comedians. John Richardson and Russell Howard, Acaster, Gamble, Adam Hills. Like, I love all these people for lots of different ways. Rosie Jones, Tom Allen. Like, I'm really lucky that I get to work with people who I like as people, who I think are also brilliant comedians, because they share that interest, they share that that love of it.
If you're like me, do you go to a lot of comedy shows as a member of the audience?
Do you know what? It's funny. You wrote that question. You sent me an email with these questions.
Yeah.
And I did what every comedian does, which is I looked at them and I didn't really look at them. I opened the attachment to show Willingham manners.
Thank you so much.
And then paid absolutely no attention to what you were asking. And any comedian who denies that is a liar, because that's exactly what we do. And that's what we do. And this was the only question that popped up at me, and I realised that I don't really do it anymore. I used to. I was an obsessive about going to gigs, but I suppose I just don't have the time now.
Yeah. If you're on a bill of acts, would you stay and watch all the acts?
Yes. Yeah,
all the
100%.
time.
And I'm usually
regardless.
emceeing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I can, I absolutely will.
Yeah.
I'd say 100%. I've got a bit naughty at it recently because I have started like I don't get to gig very much, and then if there's some football on the telly and that football don't start until 8, and I can get to the gig at 7:30 and do 5 minutes of new stuff and then nip off. And
I'm a bit like that with Carlisle United.
Yeah, I am. Well, I'm a Liverpool fan, very much like that at the moment. But so yeah, but normally because I love it, I love watching it. But I'm a bit of an obsessive about it in terms of what people are doing, and I don't always. I don't enjoy. I don't. It's one of the reasons I love Kitson so much is because I can watch Kitson as a fan, and also musical comedy. So, the Concords or Crizzards, who are new, who I really like, I can just watch them as a fan.
Yeah.
But when it's other people, I do watch them with my thinking face on, thinking about toppers and thinking, does that inspire me to do anything? So, it can be you can go out as a punter and then just end up working because you're working in your head. You know,
the reason why I asked those two questions, is that there's a section in my blog called The Ones That Got Away, and I wrote about 25 comedians who have either passed on or I haven't had a chance to see. And top of the tree for me was Morecambe and Wise. I saw everybody else except them in the 70s. But Dave Allen's in there, Bob Monkhouse, and goes on and on and on and on. And there's also another section in the blog which lists testimonials from comedians, loads of comedians and family and friends. It's funny you mentioned James Acaster because he's written my favorite testimonial. He simply wrote, if I wasn't a comedian, I would happily sit next to Richard Gill all day and make him laugh. And I just thought that's wonderful. But it's just magical going on this comic journey because there's so many memories. And that's why the blog and the podcast exist. I've so much enjoyed talking to you. You've been an absolutely wonderful.
I loved it. It's been so great. I mean, we're a couple of chatterboxes. We could keep going.
I could talk to you all day. I really could. Is there anything else you'd like to mention? Is there any? What social media are you on?
I am. I'm sort of all over everything. I think I'm Mark John Olver on Instagram. I'm Mark Olver on Twitter. Belly Laughs is the big charity stuff that I do, and we're really excited about next year because we're going to a few different cities and building it for a while. And I love those gigs. And if you are going to come to Bristol, then pick a day in January, and you'll be able to see. But 18th of January, if you want to come to Bristol, Wednesday the 18th of January is the one you want to come to because we do a thing in a place called Wapping Wharf, which is loads of little restaurants all in the same place. And we do about 15 gigs in one night there. And everyone sort of runs from gig to gig.
I might well do that. I might well do that.
The only other thing I would say is I love comedy. Sometimes we forget how important the non-comedians in comedy are, and we sometimes forget the venue staff and the agents and the promoters and the mums and dads of the comics and also the fans, like people who love it, and that's what's so great about this podcast and your blog and everything like that, because like without everyone else, like comedians we're idiots, and we wouldn't go anywhere or do anything or have anyone to watch us. We'd just be people sat chatting, and the whole world of stand-up is incredibly important. And I say that because I watched 1,200 clips of stand-up this year for the BBC New Comedy Awards.
Wow.
And not all of those 1,200 people are going to be successful or even keep doing stand-up. But they've sent in those clips because they love stand-up.
Yeah.
And there are other parts of the stand-up world that are amazing. And sometimes people focus a little bit too much on these bellends who get up and do it. But the world is so interesting and can be and is, but can be better. So diverse and so interesting and so creative and a space that's a really safe space. I always say, I do a tweet every year in September when I say to people, if your kids are students and they're going off to university and you're a little bit worried about them, maybe they're a loner, or maybe they don't always fit in with everyone. Send them to their local open mic scene in that city. Send them to their gig, because these gigs, the smaller gigs, can be some of the most supportive, lovely, warm. I know 100% that if someone went to ABC Comedy and they'd never been to a comedy gig before, and someone went, "Oh, that bloke over there, the one with the loud laugh, go and sit next to him."
I don't know who that is.
You know. And you would, and they would be welcomed, and I think that's and
very much
we forget that, because we start talking about how to get those paid 20s, and we start talking about agents, and we start talking about stadiums and TV shows and sitcoms and films, but we do sometimes forget that at a basic level, it's a space where people can just meet people, and I think that is lovely.
It certainly has given me an enormous amount of confidence going, and which can only be a good thing with the rest of your life.
It's amazing.
Thank you so much for those kind words.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully we will see each other in the flesh soon.
Very much so. I'm looking forward very much to seeing you very, very soon. I'm looking at the 18th of January.
I'm going to go and have my dinner in a place called
I don't blame you.
The Moor End Sprouts, which is a pub I've never been to before. I've never heard of before, but I like the name. The Moor End Sprouts.
Well, I bet that they sound fantastic.
Don't they? Rich, take care. Have a lovely rest of your day. And
you.
Yeah, I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful.
Bye, bud.
All the best. Thank you.